My name is Callie Brennan. I am 33 years old, and on the morning of December 23rd, I received a text from my mother with a photo attached. In the photo, my younger sister Jess was standing at my front door, the front door of the house I had spent 7 years saving for, 2 years designing on AutoCAD at my kitchen table on Wednesday evenings after work, and 18 months watching go up board by board on a half-acre lot in the Bolden Creek neighborhood of Austin, Texas. She was holding a balloon bouquet that said "New Home" in silver letters. She was grinning. My 5-year-old niece Sophie was standing beside her, holding a miniature version of the same balloon, still in her pajamas, her hair loose and sleepy, and catching the December morning light. My mother's caption read, "Shh, Christmas surprise for Jess. Isn't it perfect?" She sent it to me by accident. She meant to send it to my Aunt Diane. I want to start right there. With that photo, with that text, with the particular kind of silence that settles inside your chest when 33 years of a quiet suspicion about how your family sees you is suddenly, accidentally, finally confirmed in a single glowing rectangle. Because everything that came after that moment started in that silence. The conversation I had with my best friend Tamara, 40 minutes later, the call to my attorney, Robert Caulfield, the next morning, the purchase agreement I signed at 6:19 in the evening, the sold rider stapled across a for sale sign in my own driveway on Christmas morning, while my mother stood at the curb with a Hobby Lobby bow in her hands and no house left to put it on. All of it started with a photo I was never supposed to see. Before we get into this, please like and subscribe, but only if this story truly resonates with you, only if some part of it feels like it was lifted directly out of your own chest. And I want to know where you are right now. Drop your city and your local time in the comments below, because some stories feel less lonely when you know someone somewhere is hearing them with you, and I want to know exactly who is in this room with me tonight. Now let me go back to the beginning. Because nothing about that December makes sense without understanding the family I came from, and what it took for me to become the daughter who finally stopped holding back. I grew up in Round Rock, Texas, about 20 miles north of Austin, in a 4-bedroom house on Chestnut Lane that my parents had lived in since 1989. My father, Gerald Brennan, was the varsity football coach at Round Rock High School for 26 years. He was a big, square, easy-laughing man who thought in X's and O's and who communicated love primarily through the presence of his physical body. Showing up at the field, fixing something in the garage, driving somewhere without being asked. He was not a complicated man. He was good-natured and stubborn, had strong opinions about outdoor turkey preparation, and very few opinions about his daughters' inner lives. I loved him the way you love a father who tried with every tool he had, even when some of the most important tools were ones he'd never bothered to acquire. My mother, Patricia Brennan, sold residential real estate. Keller Williams for 12 years, then her own small brokerage she ran from the kitchen table, a 6-agent operation she named Brennan Realty Group, and managed with the same organized efficiency she brought to every corner of our household. She was sharp and quick and good with numbers and better with people, and she had the particular confidence of someone who had spent 3 decades assessing the value of other people's homes. She ran the family's emotional calendar. She made the phone calls, managed the grudges, organized the Christmases, decided what was owed and by whom and when. She loved her daughters. I believe that now, and I believed it then. She just had a fixed, practiced idea of what that love was supposed to look like, and that idea had never quite been wide enough to hold me. Jess is 3 years younger than me, and Jess has always been, in the Brennan household, the easy one. Not because she performed it or faked it. Jess is genuinely warm, genuinely funny, the kind of person who remembers your coffee order 3 months after you mentioned it once and asks after your mother's knee surgery the week of the follow-up appointment. She is real and she is lovable, and I want to be clear. This story is not about me resenting my sister for being easy to love. I have never resented Jess for that. What I have reckoned with, in the specific, slow, long overdue way that therapy makes you reckon with things, is what her ease cost me. What the contrast between us cost me. What 30 years of being the daughter who could handle it cost me, quietly, in increments nobody ever added up. Because I was not easy. I was the kind of child who asked too many questions and retained too many answers and wanted, always, to understand how things worked at the level underneath the visible surface. At 8 years old, I took apart the family's VCR with a screwdriver, carefully, methodically, not out of destruction but genuine curiosity about what was inside, and reassembled it well enough that it worked, though the tracking was never quite right after. I read the encyclopedia volumes my father kept on the living room bookshelf, not as schoolwork but as pleasure. I argued with my 5th-grade teacher about a math problem on a test, and was right, which earned me a note in my file and nothing else. My report cards across elementary school said some variation of Callie is a strong student who would benefit from learning when to hold back, which is the kind of sentence a certain type of adult writes when a girl is too much of something they find inconvenient. My mother enrolled Jess in dance at 5 and piano at 7, and kept both going through high school, because Jess loved them, and my mother loved watching her love them. I played basketball starting at 9. Serious basketball, first team all-district my junior year, one of the better point guards in our district, and my mother came to maybe 60% of my games. My father came to as many as didn't conflict with his own team's schedule, which across 4 years of high school meant he saw me play maybe half the time. I am not giving you those numbers to indict anyone. I am giving you those numbers because 60% is what it was, and I learned, somewhere between 10 and 14, to adjust what I expected accordingly. The summer before my senior year, I told my parents I wanted to study structural engineering at the University of Texas. My father said good, in the same tone he said good when the weatherman confirmed the weekend forecast. My mother said, "Are you sure you wouldn't want something a little more?" And then stopped, because even she heard how that sentence was going to finish. UT accepted me with a partial scholarship of $8,400 per year. The afternoon the letter came, I read it twice, set it on the kitchen table, and watched my mother read it, set it down, and immediately ask whether I'd heard from Jess about her campus tour at Texas State yet. My mother drove Jess to San Marcos for that tour the following spring. 3 hours round trip, Starbucks iced coffees, Jess's playlist on the car stereo. I drove myself to Austin orientation in a 2001 Honda Civic with 4 garbage bags of clothes, a laundry basket, and a scientific calculator I'd bought with babysitting money. My mother waved from the front porch and said, "Call us when you get there." The call lasted 4 minutes and 12 seconds. I remember because I checked the screen after and thought, 4 minutes. After 18 years. I don't tell you these things to build a legal brief. I tell you because I want you to understand the texture of what I came from. The fact that favoritism, in most families, is not one large, undeniable event. It is 1,000 small calibrations, 1,000 moments where someone makes a choice, a small choice that tells you precisely where you fall in the family's ordering of things. I was not abused. I was not neglected in any way that left obvious marks. I was simply, consistently, the daughter who didn't need anything, or rather, the daughter who was assumed not to, which over 33 years of living amounts to exactly the same thing. I graduated from UT in 4.5 years with a degree in structural engineering and a job offer from Caldwell Park Engineering, a mid-sized firm in downtown Austin with a strong commercial portfolio and a co-founder named Elena Park, who had a reputation for taking junior associates seriously as long as they took the work seriously first. I started at 23, making $64,000. By 30, I was a senior associate at $112,000, my name in the acknowledgments on projects that mattered, and Elena had started using the phrase partner track in our annual reviews in the way that meant she intended it, not as encouragement. My father retired from coaching the year I turned 30. My mother's brokerage was doing steadily well. 6 agents, consistent Williamson County volume, her name on yard signs in the Cedar Park and Leander subdivisions that had been selling and reselling for a decade. They were comfortable, stable, content in the shape of the life they'd built. I visited for holidays and called on Sundays and kept a careful, practiced emotional distance that I had told myself for years was just the natural gap between an independent adult and her parents, and which I now understand, thanks to Thursday evenings on Dr. Marsh's couch, was a protective architecture I'd been constructing since about the 4th grade. Jess had married Kevin Mallory at 26. Kevin was Round Rock native, good-natured, occasionally funny, and reliably underprepared. A sales manager at Round Rock Toyota, who made decent money in good months, and was stretched thinner than he liked to let on in the others. They had Sophie the spring after the wedding, and Owen 18 months after Sophie. My mother had become, in the years since, the kind of grandmother who showed up with casseroles and stayed 4 hours and drove 40 minutes each way without being asked, and loved those kids with the unguarded, uncomplicated fullness she'd always reserved for Jess and never quite extended to me. I watched this, the way you watch a pattern you've seen for decades, finally complete itself, with the particular complicated feeling of being both right and sorry that you are. I met Marcus Okafor at a birthday dinner in the spring of 2021. He was a friend of a pharmacist at Seton Medical Center on 38th Street, originally from Houston, 34 at the time, quiet in the way that made you lean forward to hear him, rather than the way that made you forget he was there. We were friends for 4 months before anything shifted, which I think is the reason it worked. We built something before we named it. He met my parents over dinner at Chewy's in Round Rock that fall, and my mother liked him immediately, and my father liked him 5 minutes after that. And I noted both with the careful, habitual attention I'd spent 30 years developing around my family's reactions to my life. But all of that, Marcus, the career, the salary, the accumulating evidence of a life built on my own terms and no one else's, is backdrop. The center of this story is the house. And for you to understand what it meant to lose it, even for 3 days, you need to understand what it cost to build it, from the first idea to the last board. I bought the lot in Bolden Creek in March of 2020, half an acre, south of Lady Bird Lake, in a neighborhood that Austin had been discovering slowly for a decade. The pandemic had briefly confused the market into a moment of relative affordability, and I moved into that moment fast. $92,000, wired from a savings account I'd been feeding since my first paycheck at 23. The lot was overgrown and backed by an alley, and had a pecan tree in the southeast corner that David Torres, my contractor, said was mine to keep or clear. I kept it. Some decisions are easy. I designed the house myself over 6 months, on AutoCAD at my kitchen table on Wednesday evenings, while Marcus sat across from me eating takeout and occasionally leaning over my shoulder to ask questions I loved answering. 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, 12-foot ceilings on the main floor, south-facing windows angled for passive solar gain. I ran the thermal modeling myself, because I can't not. An open-plan kitchen built around a 36-inch gas range I'd been looking at in catalogs since I was 24, and drawing foundation plans for other people's dream kitchens. Board and batten exterior in a warm cream with black window trim. A front porch 12 feet deep, because I grew up in Texas, and I know what a porch is supposed to be able to hold. I hired Torres Construction. I knew David Torres from a commercial referral at Caldwell Park. Reliable, meticulous. The contractor who tells you before he charges you for discovering it, that something in your plan needs revising. We broke ground in March 2021. I was on site every Saturday morning for the first 4 months, and called David twice a week after that. I watched the foundation go in. I watched the framing rise. I watched my own design become, slowly, a thing that existed in the physical world, rather than just on a screen. And I want to be honest with you about what that felt like, because it is not a feeling I had ever had before, and it is exactly the feeling that made what happened at Thanksgiving unbearable. It felt like proof of something I had been arguing with myself about for 30 years, without ever letting myself win the argument. I moved in October 2022. Total cost, land and construction combined, $318,000, financed through a construction-to-permanent loan with Frost Bank at a rate I'd locked in before the market moved, paid down faster than the schedule required, because carrying debt makes me anxious in a specific, low-frequency way that I now understand is its own kind of inheritance from a childhood spent watching adults manage money by pretending the decisions weren't financial. By November 2023, when I had my loan officer pull an informal appraisal, the house had moved to $350,000. 28 months of Austin's market doing what it does. I had $89,400 remaining on the mortgage. The equity was mine, built by me, belonging to no one on any legal or logical or moral basis, except the one woman whose name was on the deed. My parents saw it 3 times in 2 years. The housewarming in November 2022, where my mother walked through saying things like, "The kitchen is really very smart, and I've always liked this kind of open plan," in the careful professional tone she used when evaluating other people's listings. Thanksgiving 2022, where she mentioned at some point during dinner that the house felt a little large for just one person. And once in the spring of 2023, when she and Jess and the kids stopped in unannounced, on their way back from the Austin Children's Museum, and my mother stood in my kitchen, looking at the 36-inch range I had waited 8 years to own, and said, "You know, Callie, for a starter home, this is really very well done." For a starter home, I let it go, the way I had been letting things go since I was 8 years old with a screwdriver and a VCR. Now, here is where the wound starts, and I need you with me here, because the details matter more than almost anything else. Thanksgiving 2023, my parents' house on Chestnut Lane in Round Rock, same 4-bedroom I grew up in, same beige carpet surviving on stubbornness and strategic furniture placement, same kitchen laminate that had been almost due for an update since approximately 2011. My father grilled the turkey outside because he had never once in living memory made it any other way, and he had opinions about oven turkey that were cheerful and firm and not negotiable. Marcus and I drove up together on a clear Texas November day, the sky too blue for the season, the highway light coming in sideways and making everything look a little more significant than it actually is. Jess and Kevin were there with Sophie and Owen. Kevin's parents, Doug and Carol Mallory from Bastrop, had driven over for the day. We ate at 2 in the afternoon. Turkey, cornbread dressing, my mother's sweet potato casserole, with the brown sugar and pecans on top, a pecan pie I'd made from a recipe I'd been using since college. The kids were good. Sophie had made a paper turkey at school from her handprint and needed everyone to admire it, which we did in rotation. Owen was 3, and narrating the entire meal in real time, mostly about the bread rolls. After dessert, my father cleared his throat. The specific clearing, I'd heard it 100 times, the sound he made before addressing his team, slow and deliberate, and finishing, like a door being settled into its frame. "Your mother and I have been thinking," he said, "about the family, about what we want to do while we're still here to do it." I thought, health news, something with his heart. I went very still. He looked at Jess, then at my mother. My mother set down her coffee cup. She had been waiting for this moment. I could see it in the way she'd arranged herself, the posture of someone who knows exactly what comes next. She folded her hands on the tablecloth and looked at Jess first, and then at me, and she said, "We want to give Jess and Kevin the Bolden Creek house. Callie's house. We've spoken to a real estate attorney, a colleague of mine through the Texas Association of Realtors, and we've worked out a plan. Callie would sign a quitclaim deed, we'd cover the associated transfer costs as our gift to everyone, Jess and Kevin would finally have a home for the children, and we'd all feel settled." She delivered all of this in the same measured, professional tone she used when explaining an escrow process to first-time buyers. Smoothly, with the details already assembled, with the implicit understanding that the only remaining step was nodding. The room went completely quiet. I could hear Owen breathing in the next room. I could hear the refrigerator hum. I could hear, somewhere far back in the house, the sound of the paper turkey Sophie had hung on the utility room door, moving slightly in the air current from the heating vent. Marcus, beside me, set his fork down on his plate. That sound, silver on ceramic in that particular silence, is something I will carry for the rest of my life. I want to stop right here, in that dining room, with the leftover rolls on the table and the kids' crayons on the sideboard, and Marcus's hand somewhere near mine on the tablecloth. I want to stop and ask you something, because I know that at least some of you hearing this right now have been in a version of this room. Not necessarily about a house, about something you built, something you made real through your own work, and your own years, and your own sacrifice, and then watched someone in your family pick up and offer away like it was already theirs to give. If you have been in that room, if you know that particular quality of silence when something belonging to you is described as a solution to someone else's problem, tell me in the comments, what was the one moment that made it undeniable for you? Not the slow suspicion you'd been carrying for years. The single moment you knew for certain. I want to hear it, I said, and I said it quietly because I was not yet ready to be loud about it. That's my house, Mom. My name is the only name on the deed. I bought the lot, I designed the build. I've been carrying the mortgage for 2 years. You cannot give someone my house. My mother tilted her head, the tilt she uses when she is being patient with someone who has not yet understood the plan. Callie, nobody is taking anything from you tonight. We are asking you to be part of a family solution. You are established. You have your career. You have Marcus. You have your savings. Jess and Kevin have 2 small children, and they've been trying to buy for 3 years, and they keep losing out. You have always been the one who figures things out. This is you figuring something out for all of us. You have always been the one who figures things out. I want you to hear the precision of that sentence. It is not a compliment. It is the most efficient 12 words she could have chosen to tell me that my competence had always been understood, in this family, as something available for redistribution. That being capable was not credit I had earned, it was a debt I owed. That being the daughter who figures it out meant being the daughter whose house could be given away on Christmas morning because she would figure that out too. Kevin Mallory was staring at his empty pie plate with the studied attention of a man who is very much hoping his pie plate will tell him what to do next. Doug and Carol Mallory, his parents, looked genuinely and visibly uncomfortable. Carol actually pressed her fingers against the back of her own neck, the reflex people make when they need to be somewhere else entirely. They had not known this was on the agenda. I could see it in them. Jess looked at me. Her eyes were full. I waited. I gave her the silence. I gave her 5 seconds, and then 8, and then 12, waiting for her to say, "Mom, we cannot do this," or "I told you I didn't want it this way," or "Callie, I am so sorry, I had nothing to do with this." She looked at me for those 12 seconds with her eyes full, and then she looked back down at the tablecloth. And that silence, her silence, was the second wound of that day, separate from my mother's plan, more personal than my mother's plan, because it came from the person who, if our positions had been reversed, I would have defended without hesitating. I asked Kevin whether he had known. He said they had discussed it as a possibility, which was the careful phrasing of a man who lets something wrong go forward and hopes the language will soften his role in it. I asked Jess. She said quietly, "I didn't know it was finalized. I thought it was still theoretical." I didn't believe her entirely. I still don't know where the line is. I do know that theoretical doesn't explain why she'd already started thinking about paint colors, which I found out later, which is the detail that settled in me heaviest, the one I kept coming back to in the weeks that followed. I told my parents I needed time to think. This was not true. I had already decided. But Sophie was 5 years old and Owen was 3, and they were right there, and I was not going to let what was coming happen in front of children. My mother took this as progress. She nodded and said she understood, that this was a lot to take in at once, and that they'd be in touch about the paperwork timeline. As though the paperwork was a scheduling matter, as though there was already a timeline to be in touch about. Marcus drove us back to Austin. We were southbound on I-35, just past the Georgetown exits, when he said quietly, without any preamble, "We're not doing it." I looked at him. He said, "I know you already know that. I just want you to hear someone else say it out loud." I cried for about 15 minutes, somewhere around the Pflugerville interchange. Real crying, the kind that starts in your chest rather than your eyes. Then I stopped, and by the time we crossed the river and the downtown Austin lights came into the mirror behind us, something that had been soft in me for 33 years had gone quietly, permanently rigid. The next 10 days were the specific purgatory of a decision already made that the people around you haven't accepted yet. My mother called 3 times between Thanksgiving and December 18th. Each call moved further down the road of assumed compliance. She mentioned Greg Harwell, the attorney, mentioned the quitclaim timeline, mentioned, on the 3rd call, that Jess had already spoken to a moving company. A moving company? As though the logistics of occupying my house were already being calendared, which was the moment I understood fully that this had never been a conversation. It had always been a notification with extra steps. I didn't argue on those calls. I said things like "I'm still thinking," and "this is a lot to process." Every word was true. I was thinking about it constantly, specifically about how to do what I had already decided to do, in a way that was clean, irrevocable, and already completed before anyone had the opportunity to talk me out of it, the way they'd been talking me out of things my entire life. Here is what I was not saying on those calls: that on the Monday after Thanksgiving, I had called Tamara Singh. Tamara and I met freshman year at UT, lived 2 doors down from each other in Jester Hall, split a cab to the Houston bus station the weekend before Christmas break our first year, when we were both too broke for the airport. She has been selling real estate in Austin for 8 years, through Compass, and is the most practically intelligent person I know in any emergency. The kind of person who, when you call her at 9 in the morning with a situation, asks 2 questions and then tells you exactly what needs to happen. I told her everything. She was quiet for 3 seconds, which for Tamara is basically extended meditation. And then she said, "Kali, how fast can you move?" I said, "How fast can you?" She listed the house off-market on December 19th. Off-market first, through Tamara's network of pre-qualified buyers, because I needed it fast and I needed it quiet. If it hit the MLS, my mother's Texas Association of Realtors alerts would surface it within 24 hours, and I needed a signed contract in place before she had anything to fight over. Tamara put it in front of 6 buyers before the day was out. By 4 o'clock I had 2 offers, both above asking. The stronger one came in at $362,000. A couple relocating from Denver. She'd accepted a director-level role at Dell Technologies' Austin campus, and they needed a house by the 1st of the year. Cash offer. No financing contingency. No inspection contingency. Waived on their initiative and documented. Ready to close December 30th. I called Robert Caulfield from the Compass parking lot while Tamara was still printing the second offer for comparison. Robert is a real estate and family law attorney on West 6th Street, early 50s, careful and precise, the kind of man who tells you the truth even when it involves a number you didn't want to hear. He had handled the original lot purchase for me in 2020. I asked him point blank, sitting in a cold car in a parking lot 6 days before Christmas, could my parents, could Jess, could anyone, make any legal claim on this house? He pulled the deed from Travis County records while I had the phone to my ear. Sole owner. No co-ownership clause. No family trust language. No encumbrances of any kind. Your family can want whatever they like, he said. Wanting isn't owning, Callie. You could sell tomorrow to a stranger, and there is nothing anyone could do about it. Nobody but you has a vote. I want you to write that sentence down somewhere. Your phone. A sticky note. The back of whatever envelope is closest to you right now. Because it took me 33 years to hear someone say it about my own life, and I don't want any of you to wait that long. I signed the purchase agreement at 6:19 in the evening on December 23rd, and I did not tell my mother. I want you to sit with me in that decision for a moment, because I know it's the one that divides the room. Some of you are thinking, she should have said something, she should have warned them. Here is the truth of why I didn't. Because I knew if I did, my mother would cry, and if she cried, my father would call. And if my father called, he would say something gentle and certain about how she just loves this family so much, Callie, and I would have 48 hours of being managed and reasoned with, until I was so worn down by the weight of other people's certainty that I might do what I had always done before, hesitate just long enough to step back from myself. I could not afford another hesitation. I needed the house to already be gone before it could be saved from me. So I kept it quiet. For 7 days. Tell me something. And I mean this. I want you to think before you type. Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping yourself? Not a loud, dramatic choice. A quiet one. The kind where one direction leads to the version of you that stays small so other people stay comfortable, and the other direction leads somewhere you've never been but that feels, for the first time, more like you than anywhere else you've stood. If you've stood at that fork, tell me in the comments which way you went, because I have a feeling most of us have been there, and I have a feeling most of us chose peace because we were raised to, and I have a feeling a lot of us are still paying for it. Christmas morning. I was at Marcus's apartment in North Loop, where I'd been staying since the 23rd, because sleeping in the house that was under contract felt strange, like remaining in a hotel room after checkout. He made migas, eggs and crispy tortilla strips, and jalapenos and white cheddar, the specific breakfast he makes on mornings. He knows I need something with weight in it. We sat at his kitchen table while the pale Austin December light came through the window over the sink, and I was, for the first time in 6 weeks, genuinely calm, not numb, not performing it. Calm, the real kind, the kind that comes from having already made the decision rather than still circling it. My phone started ringing at 9:14 a.m. My mother, then my father, then my mother again, then a number I didn't recognize, which I found out later was Kevin's cell. Then my mother once more. I watched them come in, the screen lighting up and going dark, lighting up and going dark. Marcus sat across from me with his coffee and said nothing. Didn't tell me to pick up. Didn't tell me not to. Just sat there and waited. The way he waits when he knows it's mine to decide. I picked up the 5th call. My mother was not screaming. I want to say that because screaming would have been, in some ways, easier to hold. What she was doing was the controlled, rigid, eerily composed voice of a woman whose plan has collapsed publicly and who is processing it through 30 years of professional composure that does not have room for falling apart on a sidewalk on Christmas morning. She and my father had driven to the Bolden Creek house that morning. They'd picked up Jess and Kevin and the kids first. My mother had gone back the night before to attach the Hobby Lobby bow, a large red velvet wireframe bow, to my front porch railing. She had a spare key. She'd had it since the housewarming in November 2022, when I'd handed her one in a moment of what I now understand was misplaced optimism, and I'd never thought to ask for it back. They pulled into the driveway, and there was a compass for sale sign with a sold rider in red letters across it, and a lockbox on the front door that did not respond to any key my mother possessed. "What did you do?" she said. Flat, deliberate. A period, not a question mark. "I sold my house, Mom." "You sold it. On Christmas morning. I signed the contract on December 23rd. The closing is December 30th. I sold my house because it was mine to sell." Jess is standing in that driveway right now with her children. Her voice cracked on children, and I want to be honest, that cracked something in me too. Not my decision, nothing cracked my decision, but something under it, something old. Because she was not manufacturing the emotion. Sophie really was there. Owen really was there. They were 5 and 3 years old, and they did not understand why Christmas had a lockbox on it instead of a bow, and that confusion was real, and it was not their fault, and it was also not mine. My mother had told her grandchildren about a plan that required my consent before obtaining my consent. The confusion those children were feeling in that driveway on Christmas morning was the direct consequence of that sequence of choices. Not mine. That is the thing I needed to say to myself about 30 times in the weeks that followed, and that I am saying to you now because I suspect some of you need to hear it about something in your own life. When the fallout from someone else's presumption lands on people you love, that fallout is not your fault. Not if you didn't create the presumption. The house was never yours to give, I said. It was never Jess's to receive. I'm not going to discuss this today. I hung up. I set the phone face down on Marcus's kitchen table. He reached across and put his hand over mine. The migas were getting cold. The Austin winter light was coming through the window, pale and thin and steady, and I sat in it and I breathed and I did not fall apart. That is the moment I am most proud of. Not the listing, not the contract, not even the decision itself. The 10 seconds after I hung up that phone, when I had every reason to panic or apologize or call her back to soften it, and instead, I just sat there and breathed. The 6 weeks that followed were not simple, and I am not going to tell you they were. My mother's first contact after Christmas was a handwritten letter delivered to my office at Caldwell Park on January 8th. 4 pages on her good cream stationery, alternating between describing what I had done as an act of cruelty toward this family, and, almost in the same paragraph, offering to move past it if I'd contribute half the sale proceeds to a down payment for Jess and Kevin to make this right. She had done the math. $121,000 she wanted, give or take closing costs. She closed with, "We ask only that you remember who raised you, and what that should mean." I didn't respond. Robert Caulfield had told me, gently but clearly, that anything I put in writing during a heated family dispute could become the subject of claims with no legal merit but significant emotional cost to defend against. So I filed the letter in a drawer and said nothing. My father called once. Just him, on his own cell phone, from what I later figured out was his garage, which meant he'd gone outside specifically so my mother wouldn't overhear. He didn't yell. Gerald Brennan has never once in my life raised his voice at me, which is its own complicated kind of thing. He said, "I think we made a mistake, Callie. I don't think we thought about it the right way." I said, "Dad, what you planned was taking my house, whatever the reasoning was." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I know." 2 words, the most direct acknowledgement I had ever received from him about how I had been seen, or not seen, in that family. I let it matter without pretending it fixed everything, because it mattered and it didn't fix everything, and both of those things were true. Carol Mallory, Kevin's mother, called my mother in early January. I know this because Aunt Diane told me in the particular tone Aunt Diane uses for information she has been waiting to share. Carol told my mother, plainly, that you do not plan a Christmas gift around another adult's property without obtaining that adult's agreement first, and that she and Doug were not comfortable with what had happened. My mother apparently received this the way she receives most things that challenge her established view of events, with a polite, fixed expression that gives nothing back. I started therapy. Finally, urgently, specifically. Dr. Yvonne Marsh, an office on Exposition Boulevard in Tarrytown, 3rd floor of a converted Victorian with monstera plants in the waiting room, and a couch exactly the right depth for sitting in a way that suggests you intend to stay a while. Dr. Marsh is in her late 50s, precise and patient, the kind of therapist who waits until you finish the sentence you think you're saying before she asks you about the one you're actually saying. We worked on the house, what it meant, what losing it for those 3 days meant, why the thing I felt most in January was not anger or grief, but a staggering, almost physical relief. In our 4th session, she said, "The house wasn't the original wound, Callie. It was the moment the original wound stopped being something you could explain away." I sat with that sentence for a week before I was able to look at it straight. In March, I bought another house. Not in Bolden Creek. That chapter was closed and I didn't want to rebuild the same thing in the same location, which felt more like returning to a fight than starting something new. I found a mid-century modern in Travis Heights, 2 bedrooms, a study I converted into a drafting room, a back garden that had been neglected for a few growing seasons and needed a full year of attention. It was exactly what I needed. $274,000 cash, paid from the sale proceeds. No mortgage, no bank, no encumbrances. One name on the deed, and that name was mine. In April, I made partner at Caldwell Park Engineering, the youngest in the firm's 19-year history. Elena Park shook my hand in her office and told me she'd been building toward this offer for 3 years, and that I'd earned every square inch of it. And on the drive home, I sat at a red light on South Lamar and thought about my mother standing in my kitchen, saying for a starter home, "This is very well done," and felt something clarify in me so completely it was almost audible, like a cable coming taut. There's a nameplate on my office door now. C. Brennan, P.E., partner. Some mornings I stop in the hallway and look at it a second or two longer than is probably professional, and then I go in and start working, and the work is mine in a way that feels different than it did before that December. It's always been mine technically, but now I feel it. Jess and I went quiet. Not with violence, no final text, no group chat implosion, no confrontation engineered at a family event. We simply stopped. I stopped initiating. She stopped responding. 6 months into that silence, I heard from my father, in a phone call ostensibly about something else, that she and Kevin had bought a house. A 3-bedroom in Pflugerville, $287,000, conventional loan, their names on a mortgage they'd qualified for themselves. No family help, no rescue. Their deed. I don't know what role December played in that, whether it shamed them into action or freed them from waiting, or both simultaneously. I let myself not need to know. Kevin's parents, as it turned out, had more to say about the whole plan than anyone had anticipated. Doug Mallory told my father, at some point in January, that the entire scheme had been a mistake from the start, that you can't build a family Christmas around taking someone else's home and expect it to land as generosity. My father told me this in the spring, careful and oblique, the way he delivers things he thinks I need to hear but is uncertain how to hand over. I thanked him. I meant it. My mother and I are, as of this past Thanksgiving, in what Dr. Marsh calls low contact, low conflict. We speak on the phone. We have not attempted a shared Thanksgiving since 2023. She has been running 2 separate holiday gatherings without my ever asking her to, which is its own quiet acknowledgement. The rearranging of furniture by someone who cannot yet say I was wrong, but can clear a path around the damage. She came to see the Travis Heights house last July, walked through without categorizing it as a starter anything, stood in the back garden under the live oak that was there before the house and will be there after, and said, almost to the tree rather than to me, "You always did know how to make a place feel right." It is the closest she has ever come to sorry. I have been learning, in Dr. Marsh's office, in the slow, ordinary passage of Tuesdays and Saturdays since, to receive what people can actually give without punishing them for the distance between what they give and what you needed. My father came to dinner in August. Just the 3 of us, Marcus and my dad and me, at Veracruz All Natural on South First. No occasion, no agenda. He talked to Marcus for 45 minutes about Houston neighborhoods and defensive schemes, and a kitchen remodel he'd finally started on the Chestnut Lane house, replacing the laminate countertops at last, 34 years after they'd first needed it. On the way to the parking lot, he stopped under the awning and hugged me. Both arms, real pressure, the hug of someone who has been carrying something heavy and is finally setting it down, and said, "I'm proud of you, Cals." Just that. The plain version with nothing attached to it. I cried in Marcus's truck on the drive home, quietly, while he drove South Lamar with one hand and pretended not to notice, while absolutely noticing every second of it. And I let myself feel what those words did, not as proof that we'd arrived somewhere fully healed, because we haven't, but as proof that the distance between my father and me, the 33-year distance built from assumption and silence and 1,000 unremarked calibrations, had finally, at 64 years old for him, and 33 for me, begun to close. Marcus proposed in June, in the back garden of the Travis Heights house, on a Saturday morning while the old live oak was doing the thing old live oaks do in the early Texas summer. That dense, almost unreal green that looks like someone turned the saturation up. He had no ring yet. We chose it together 2 weeks later, and there was no audience, no performance, no bow from Hobby Lobby, just the two of us, and the oak tree, and the morning, and the question, asked quietly, in the way he asks everything that matters. We're getting married in April. Small ceremony, a venue in Dripping Springs I found by driving out there on a Sunday in August, with no agenda except finding something that felt like us. My father will be there. My mother will be there. I made that decision deliberately, and at peace with it, not because everything is resolved, but because I have learned the difference between closure and peace, and I have chosen peace, which does not require the first thing in order to exist. I don't know what Jess and I will be, eventually. I hold the possibility that it's not permanent. I hold it loosely, the way you hold a door open with your foot while you decide if you're going through. For now, we are two women who share a childhood, and have chosen, without ceremony or announcement, different distances from it. I've made peace with not knowing what comes next, which is its own kind of arrival. It is a Tuesday evening in November, as I sit here telling you all of this. I'm in the drafting room of the Travis Heights house, at the oak desk Marcus built me over, one weekend in September. I drew the plans on a Sunday afternoon, when a rainstorm was keeping us both inside, and he built it the next weekend, with tools he'd had since Houston, and it is the most useful and the most mine thing in this house, and I sit at it every single morning. There are drawings on the screen in front of me, a residential commission from a couple in Westlake Hills who want a home designed around their daughter's power wheelchair and their son's requirement for a dedicated music room and their own deep need for a kitchen where 3 adults can cook at the same time without negotiating for counter space. I love this project. I love it in the particular, unhurried way I have loved this work since I was 12 years old on a highway in Texas, asking my father who built that bridge. It has nothing to do with proving anything. It has everything to do with the bone-level understanding that a house is not an asset first. A house is the shape of the life that happens inside it. There are things I don't have yet. A fully rebuilt relationship with my mother, in the truest sense of rebuilt. A sister I can call on a Tuesday about nothing important, a version of the family I grew up in that sees me clearly, without the distortion of 30 years of deciding what I needed and didn't need on my behalf. I don't have those things. I may not have them for a long time, and there is a version of this story where I never fully do. I have made peace with that possibility too, not because it doesn't cost me anything, but because the cost of not making peace with it is higher, and I did the math. What I have is this house, and this desk, and the live oak in the back garden, and Marcus in the kitchen right now. I can hear him, the specific percussion of his dinner making, pan on burner and cabinet door, the sound I could identify in a dark room after 2.5 years of listening to it. I have a nameplate on a door that has my name on it. I have a drawing on a screen that is mine, made for a family that will live their full particular life in the house I design for them, and none of them will ever know or need to know what it cost me to get to this desk, in this room, on this Tuesday evening in November, finally building things for other people instead of watching my own things get handed away. I sold that house in 3 days. I would do it in 2 if I had it to do over, and I am the only person who had a vote. I just needed 33 years and 1 accidental text message to actually use it. If you see yourself anywhere in this story, in the Thanksgiving table, in the accidental photo, in the silence of a sister who should have spoken and didn't, in the moment you finally said no to something everyone assumed you'd just absorb, I want to hear from you. What would you have done? Sitting at that table, hearing your mother's warmest and most certain voice explain that your house wasn't really yours to keep. Leave a comment, tell me your version. I'll read every single one, and if you want more stories like this one, there's a link in the description waiting for you.